a dense mangrove forest, which feeds not only the land with nutrients, but also the ocean. Here's where the rainforest meets the reef. You can actually see the reef. It appears possibly. It is not far out there. Out to the Great Barrier Reef. Remember, this is an aeritic zone and the photic zone where it extends out from the intertidal zone and the coast out into the pelagic zone eventually. Epipelagic would be maybe towards the end of the reef. Not entirely sure. But the reef itself must be within the continental shelf because it needs the light and it needs to be able to anchor at the bottom as well. So the floating zone is where the coral will live. And from a physical standpoint, this area is an extension of where the coast really is influencing all of the life forms here. So it's an extension of the coastline in so many ways. But everything is interconnected. Make sure you remember that. You can see the difference in the colored water as we're out here now. It's darker. You'll have different phytoplankton. There's phytoplankton and zooplankton, which float around, and nekton are the things that swim on their own. Being adjacent to heavily influenced by the coastline, a lot of nutrients get in there that wouldn't necessarily be able to, except for from living organisms that rain down as they die. And being close enough to be in the photic zone where the light reaches the bottom, as well as where you also have the nutrients come down. So being that close to where the nutrients come down, they can reach the floor, being close to the coastline, and also shallow enough where the light reaches the bottom, affords some things for the organisms that live here. One of which being coral, which is in the same class as sea jellies, but they're in polyp form as opposed to medusa form. They're also symbiotic with some algae, which they release when stressed, and that's where bleaching comes from. But so again, symbiotic relationship with algae and an animal, and being in an area of the continental shelf has so much biodiversity because it is heavily influenced by that coastline. Also realize the stability that comes with being heavily influenced by the coastline in terms of salinity as well as temperature. It's a large water body where those things are much more stable than they are on land as well. Just to show you the differences in the color of the water, we are approaching a coral reef, part of the Great Barrier Reef.
So the Great Barrier Reef isn't one continuous reef system, it's actually made up of all of these smaller reefs all dotted around, making up the whole reef. Now that's a stretch of 2,700 kilometres, goes all the way up to our nearest neighbour, Papua New Guinea, down to the south coast of Queensland. So is there anybody from USA here today? A couple of you? It's about half the size of Texas, if that gives you some idea. Anybody from Japan? Nobody from Japan? Anybody from Italy? No. Nobody from Italy. Well, it's about the size of Japan and Italy. I could go through all countries all day long, but it'd probably take me a while. Cool. So, We have over 1,500 different species of fish and over 450 different species of corals out here. We are the largest reef system in the world and the first marine reserve as well. So you get lots of protected species, lots of biodiversity. We do, have a larger scale, so getting that biodiversity is kind of comes hand in hand, I suppose, with this size. We have scattered around the Great Barrier Reef as well. Most of these islands are sand cays. So what a sand cay is basically when sand accumulates on top of a reef system, it builds up over time. Eventually it sort of climbs out of the water as it, Mother Nature does its job, especially through cyclones and big storms and that sort of thing. It just sort of builds it up. When it gets to the point where it's large enough for lots of birds to start flocking to, they start using it as a breeding ground, as a rest station, that sort of thing. Then you end up with islands like Green Island. That very flat island over there is actually a sand island. So unlike the island to its right, Fitzroy Island, it only developed in the last 10,000 years or so after the reef did. Due to the fact that we are so close to the Daintree, oldest rainforest in the world, some estimates of 180 million years old, just over there on the coast, you get lots of the same very tropical flora on that island as you do over there in the rainforest as well. So which makes it quite a unique sand island. Over to the horizon where you'll see some boats navigating around today. Can't quite see them through all that glare, but you'll see the boats on the horizon just next to them. There's a couple of other sand islands, but these ones are a little bit in their early stages of development sort of thing. Pretty much just sand. As all the Sunday boaters come out in this fantastic weather, you'll also have a little bit to the north, Michaelmas Cay. So Cay is just another word for sand island. Michaelmas Cay is pretty well known for being a bird reserve. Basically about 80% of the island's actually fenced off to allow the birds to flourish there. It is breeding grounds for those guys. So if you're into your bird watching, you might take interest in going to see those ones as well. It doesn't smell too nice when you have thousands of birds all on an island though. No. The other 20% of the island is used for like recreational, for human use and stuff like that. So the Great Barrier Reef is protected in slightly different ways. So what a green zone means is you won't find any fishing vessels out here. The only vessels you will find out here either are the tourist vessels that have permits to be here in these moorings, basically have permission to do so, or the Sunday boaters, the guys that come out when the weather's nice on a weekend, that sort of thing. But they won't be spearing, they won't be fishing. You certainly won't find any commercial fishing vessels out here. The only thing they will be doing is just snorkeling like we are today. So that basically helps out the species out here. If they need to breed, there's protected species in these waters that need protecting, basically. That green zone extends a few hundred meters outside of each of these reefs, depending on the reef or depending on the determine what kind of zone you'll have. Different colours mean all sorts of different things. So you have things like your pink zones, which basically you won't even be able to get a permit to visit there, basically, even if it's just a tourist, or using the tourist vessels. These ones are just very heavily protected, or lots of research being done within them, or even things like managing crown of thorn starfish and species like that as well. Right. Neon damselfish.
Neon damselfish. Wow.
What's called?
Neon damselfish.
Of all these hundreds of
if you
species
see
of
it.
corals, we like to sort of subcategorize and make it easy for ourselves. You get your hard corals and your soft corals. Now you might have heard of these terms before. Your hard corals are reef building corals, so they have a hard limestone structure to them. They basically build their bones out as they grow. Really quite slow, these guys are growing. When these guys die, you'll end up with little bits of coral rubble. So you might see a little bit of coral rubble in between all of these corals as well. Basically that breaks down through wind and cyclones and fish all sort of chopping down on it. Eventually it'll sort of get all brought together again by algal growth, and that sort of glues it all back together, forming live coral rock. So that live coral rock is the best platform for more coral to grow on. So it actually develops the reef and grows it so that there's more space for more coral. So little bits of coral rubble is actually a good thing around our reefs because it means that the reef is expanding. Alrighty, so we go out over the deep. Not too deep out these parts. Probably about 12 meters straight down to the sand down there.
Wow.
They do lots of different things. Now don't be scared because they're only small sharks, they're little reef sharks. We don't get any of the big great whites or any scary things like that. But our little reef sharks are really important. Basically, I'll say the first thing they do is they'll take care of, the injured, the diseased, the unhealthy fish. You don't want these fish to reproduce. So to take care, usually they're the smallest ones, so they're easy pickings basically. So they reduce the population of overpopulated species and that sort of thing as well. And do a number of other things, even just the fact that they scare fish away and spread a lot of these fish around the reef, because most of these fish are grazing herbivores, basically herbivorous, algal eating fish that eat little bits of algae on top of the corals. So if you didn't have these guys, then you could just get algal blooms on top of the entire reef, and then the corals don't get the sunlight that they require for them to keep growing and for them to keep feeding.
Wow.
So I've talked about your hard corals. Your soft corals are basically ones without bone structure to them. You'll find these guys moving a little bit like plants in the breeze. But they are not plants, of course. Your corals are, of course, animals. Very intricate, very detailed, very interesting animals. If you look under the microscope at a macro level, they are a fascinating creature indeed. They have little microalgae growing inside them. That is actually the reason why corals are colourful, because the microalgae inside, called zooxanthellae, is actually the one producing the colour. So if you've ever heard of coral bleaching, what is actually happening there is that zooxanthellae inside them is actually being expelled, which is why they lose that colour. So in the event of a coral that's bleached, what's actually happening is a coral is stressing out due to non-ideal conditions, basically. We like to think of our corals as Goldilocks. It needs perfect everything. So we need to be the right salinity, so not too much rainfall, the right temperature, so if it's too hot, too cold, that can also affect them. And all sorts of different things like disease can also cause stress as well. So in that stress state, like I said, they start to expel that zooxanthellae. They require that zooxanthellae, that microalgae, to feed. Basically, that microalgae is photosynthesizing with the sun and producing sugars that they then feed on. So in the case that a coral is bleached in that stressed environment, you will find that they start to feed on and rely on the nutritional stores. So they have a couple of months in that state while eating those nutritional stores and eating into their stores. So after a few months, then you might start to see some events where they might start to die off slowly. But if the conditions bounce back, if the temperature recedes, if rainfall that, through our wet season, when we get the most of our rain, if that gets carried away by strong currents and winds, then the coral has every chance to bounce back. So if you see bleached coral, doesn't mean that it's all dying and it's all at a loss. You have every chance for that coral to rebound as well.
Right.
Corals are quite resilient in nature. They've been around for 400 million years, and our Great Barrier Reef has only been around for only about 10,000 years. So the last ice age was only just over 10,000 years ago by rough estimates, and basically before that, out here used to be flat plains. So what you find over by the coastline today is probably what you would find about 10,000 years ago out here. Things like mangroves and stuff like that, really quite shallow waters. And then over the course of a couple of hundred years, eventually it started flooding as the seawater started to rise. So the deepest part between us out here and 30 kilometres back to Cairns is only about 40 metres deep, so relatively shallow, leaving all of this at a really quite shallow depth, really quite perfect for corals. As the global temperatures change and stuff like that, corals will adapt. You'll pretty much find them in some place, some way, shape or form, just in their best environment for them. So we might not see over the next couple of hundred years the exact same reef as we are today, but they will of course adapt and overcome anything that we throw at them as well. Trying to mitigate anything that humans have caused anyway. We are doing lots of research out here. If you can't tell, I'm quite the opposite.
How long does it take for one to grow, let's say, this size?
So your hard corals are really quite slow growing. The fastest hard coral out here, you'll find these guys on our coral nurture stations, those man-made platforms in your snorkeling area. You'll see what I'm talking about when you get out there for some snorkeling. Is branching coral. So branching coral grows about 10 centimetres a year. So seems okay speed, but that's even your fastest we're growing to. Lots of these other corals only grow about a centimetre each year. So really quite slow growing. So things like your brain corals and your boulder corals, so they literally look like, you know, the wavy lines of a brain, and your boulder corals literally look just like a big boulder. These guys, at a centimetre a year, if they're a metre across, they're 100 years old. So corals can grow for centuries as well.
Cucumber.
You get a pretty
Cucumber.
Turtles, a little bit against their name, aren't very green themselves unless they've got some algal growth on top of them. They're quite brown in colour, but their internal organs, their fat content inside is actually dyed green just because of their diet, so that's quite cool. So hopefully you never see the inside of a green sea turtle, but that is what you will find if you did. Alright. We're going to start to make our way back now, guys. If you do want to see turtles today, the best chance of seeing them is actually in the shallows. So the first person to see the green sea turtles today is probably going to be the lookout Mike out there. So these sea turtles, well, they pop up about every 10 or 15 minutes because they need to come up for a breath of air because they've got lungs like we do, unlike the rest of the marine life out there that have their gills. So with those sets of lungs, they've got really good breath hold times, far better than you or I could do. So like I said, about 10-15 minutes is typically when they're swimming around, they can hold their breath for that long. Of course, they need to sleep at some point as well. So they'll take their last breath of air, they'll swim down and they'll slow their metabolism right down. They'll slow their heart rate down to about 1 beat every 9 minutes, I believe it is. So really slow heart rate. Doing that, they can hold their breath for about 4 to 6 hours. So really good breath hold. So if you're diving at night, you don't wake the turtles because they've got to come up to the surface.
Wow.
So if they're having a sleep in, maybe they're down there in their cage, get the guides to swim down and have a look because they know those little spots that they typically do go and sleep in as well.
Wow.
Might be a stupid question. There's like this coral that looks like a giant clam. Is it a coral or is it a giant
You got it.
clam?
Everything's super simply named out here. If it looks like a giant clam, it's called a giant clam. I kid you not. So our giant clams, you'll see them throughout the day. You've probably seen some already down there as well. Ask the guides where they are, they'll show you these fantastic guys. So they're our largest mollusks in the ocean. They can grow up to about 1.5 meters. They grow massive and they grow for over 100 years as well. So big bivalve filter feeders. Basically they have 2 valves, an exhaust and an intake, where they're basically just big water pumps. So they're pumping through over a swimming pool of water each day just to get the nutrients that they need and require to keep growing. So yeah, massive things they are. And we've got quite a few of them. You'll see quite a few over here as well. And for our snorkeling area and stuff too. They've got hundreds of these little eyes, like little primitive eyes, little light receptors, that they can actually see, shadow and light and stuff like that. Not quite like we do, a bit more in a flashy kind of way. But what the guys will happily do for you if you ask them is basically just go down there without touching them. They'll just wave their arm across them if they think it's a predator, something that wants to attack them. They'll use that clamp around them, that big shell, to close up. Really quite cool to see them.
Okay. Oh, it's sucking there. Yeah.
Like your shoes.
Wow.
Typically, like if they're nice and healthy, nothing really bother them. As they start to age and slow down and that sort of thing, if they get a disease, that might really slow them down and leave them prone to an attack sort of thing. So by coming out here today, guys, you're actually contributing to the health and the betterment of our lovely reef out here, not just the Fitzroy Reef, but also the entire Great Barrier Reef. So included in the price you pay just to come out here today is basically like a national park fee, a reef levy if you will. So that basically goes towards lots of different projects and different research and different sorts of funding around the reef. Some that we're actually involved in include a program called Eye on the Reef. Basically, it involves the tourist operators out here and gets them doing surveys of fish and coral counts and all sorts of things that we then send back to the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park. So that gives them a whole lot more information than they ever have been receiving before. And it might not be as detailed. You get trained up over a couple of days to give a good amount of detail. It may be not as good as somebody that's studied for years and years doing marine biology, but it's certainly a big impact when you have just a much larger number of all of this sort of being sent back to them as well. So we coral-eating starfish. Now these guys grow up to about 1 meter. They're adult size. They're quite large. You can eat about a dinner plate size of coral in a day. So they're quite harmful to fish and humans alike. Not good to be handling these guys. If you see them, they're like a dark purpley reddish colour with lots of spikes on top of them with like 20 arms. So in single numbers they're not too bad. They're native to these parts, but their main predators that used to eat them lots are all on the decline, unfortunately. They're also breeding and produce millions of eggs when they do. They're breeding faster than ever before as well, due to things like runoff and fertilizers and all sorts of different things. So them in high numbers, and when they're sort of in lake proportions, they are quite harmful to the environment. In singular form, they are a benefit to the reef, but when they're in lots of numbers, yeah, it can be quite a problem. So they say that there's 3 main threats to the reef. The crown of thorns starfish is one of them. Natural cyclones and big storms and that sort of thing is another. And then your last is just like your human impact, things like runoff and pollution and that sort of thing as well.
Pop the snorkels in, make sure everything is working. It's very sharky, there's sometimes sharks, but as you look over towards Fitzroy Island, you see that that looks like the dorsal fin of a shark. That is where this beautiful little reef here gets its name. Now we are, of course, snorkeling on the Great Barrier Reef. So what we are going to do and what it does is it grows on the rocks of a continental island. So all these rocks on the coastline, these are what looks the same submerged. And that is where the coral likes to grow.